It was 12 years ago. I was standing outside the church in my white wedding dress, tears streaming down my face. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. It read, "We will not attend the wedding of a daughter who chooses a homeless beggar over her own blood. From today, you are dead to us." But they didn't just abandon me. On my wedding night, they sent a legal notice, officially stripping me of my family name and any right to my inheritance forever. They thought I would starve. They thought within a year I'd come crawling back, begging for their money. But they were wrong. Completely wrong. The man they called a homeless beggar 12 years ago is now the owner of a tech empire worth $500 million. His personal net worth is $150 million. We now live in a massive gated mansion in Beverly Hills. And yesterday, exactly 12 years later, someone stood at the giant front door of that mansion. I opened the door and saw my mother. 12 whole years of silence. For 12 years, they acted like I didn't even exist in this world. So yesterday, when she suddenly showed up, did she apologize? Did she cry and show remorse for her mistakes? Absolutely not. She walked straight into my living room, sat on my expensive sofa, pulled a list out of her folder, and handed it to me. On that list were 7 bizarre demands. She wanted me to invest $10 million into the family business, pay off all my father's debts, and give a high-level executive job to the very brother who once laughed at my husband's torn shoes. My mother looked at me, smiled so casually, and said, "Emma, no matter what happens, at the end of the day, we're still family, right?" But there was one tiny detail my mother didn't know. She didn't know that we had already uncovered the real truth about exactly why my husband was forced to live on the streets 12 years ago. We now hold all the evidence of the heinous crime my father committed. The crime he committed to completely destroy my husband's family. My mother came to my house expecting a blank check. But instead, I handed her a small, black box. And what was inside that box didn't just wipe that fake smile off her face. It burned their entire fake empire of arrogance to the ground, forever. Sharing these words with you today isn't easy for me at all. But I know something inside me is telling me that you won't leave me halfway, that you will watch this story until the very end. I know you will stay to hear the true story of my life. I have just one small request for you. Please show some love and subscribe to my channel. I truly believe that with a little support from you, if you just stand by me, this small family channel will grow into something big one day. So, without further ado, let's begin the story of my life. But before we start, I want to say it one more time. It took a lot of courage for me to come here and share this harsh truth today. I humbly request you to listen closely to the unspoken story of my life. My name is Emma. Emma Carter. No, not Carter anymore. I am now Emma Hayes. I was born into one of the wealthiest and most influential families in America. From my very childhood, I was raised in an environment where bank balances and social status held far more value than human emotions or love. To my parents, everything in the world was nothing more than a business deal. In their eyes, the amount of respect you deserved depended entirely on how many zeros you had in your bank account. But I could never be like them. And exactly for this reason, the distance between me and my family began to grow. The ultimate consequence of this distance happened on that very day, 12 years ago. Let's go back to that day. It was a beautiful October morning. The inside of the church was beautifully decorated with white roses and orchids. There was a sweet fragrance everywhere. I was standing in front of the mirror, wearing my dream white wedding dress. For any girl, this is supposed to be the most beautiful, the happiest day of her life. But my chest was trembling with fear and a deep, crushing pain. I kept looking out toward the main hall of the church. There were 20 chairs lined up in the front row. Those chairs were beautifully tied with ribbons, and each had a name tag on it. Mom, Dad, brother, sister, uncle, aunt, my entire family. But you know what? The clock had already crossed 11:30 a.m., yet all 20 of those chairs were completely empty. Not a single person from my family had shown up. The pin-drop silence in that massive church hall felt like it was mocking me. I was holding my phone, frantically checking the screen like a crazy person. I was feeding myself false comforts. Maybe they are stuck in traffic. Maybe they will be here any second. But deep down, I knew exactly how my family was. And Daniel? Daniel had absolutely nothing they could boast about. Daniel was a man who didn't even have a roof over his head. He spent his nights in cheap motels or roadside shelters. He wore old, worn-out clothes. But amidst all the selfish people in my family, Daniel was the only person whose heart was incredibly pure. He looked into my eyes when he spoke, not at my father's money. But my family never wanted to understand that. They told me over and over again, by marrying a street beggar, you are dragging our family's name and our reputation through the dirt. Suddenly, the phone in my hand vibrated. My father's name flashed on the screen. It was a text message. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe Dad is writing that they've arrived, I thought. With trembling hands, I opened the message. It read, "We will not attend the wedding of a daughter who is marrying a homeless beggar. You have destroyed our dignity and our honor. From today, you have no relationship with us." After reading that message, the phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. I couldn't hold myself together anymore. Tears started pouring down my face uncontrollably. Wearing that heavy wedding dress, I sank to the church floor and sobbed. The people closest to me in the world, the people who held my hand as I grew up, had just thrown me away. Just for money? Just for status? Right at that moment, I felt someone gently place a hand on my shoulder. I looked up. It was Daniel. He was wearing a cheap, rented suit that didn't even fit him properly. But to me, in that moment, he looked like the most beautiful man in the world. Daniel knelt down beside me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep sorrow. He wiped my tears with his hands and said in a very calm, gentle voice, "Emma, no one from your family came, did they?" I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. Daniel let out a heavy sigh and held both my hands tightly. He looked deeply into my eyes and said, "Emma, you can still walk away. I won't blame you at all. I know you grew up in a mansion, and I have absolutely nothing to give you. Your family was right. I am probably not worthy of you. If you want, you can break off this wedding right here. It will break my heart, but I won't let you ruin your life." Hearing Daniel's words made me cry even harder. I gripped his hands even tighter and said, "Daniel, you don't understand anything. I didn't love you because you had a lot of money or because you could keep me in a palace. I chose you because when the whole world walked away and left me behind, you were the only one who stayed by my side. My family loves me with conditions, but your love has no conditions. I only want you, Daniel. Nothing else." Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes, too. He smiled gently and pulled me up to my feet. Then, hand in hand, the two of us started walking down the aisle. There was no father to hold my hand and give the bride away. We held each other's hands. As we stood before the priest, taking our vows, I glanced at those 20 empty chairs from the corner of my eye one last time. And right then and there, I let go of the last bit of pain buried in my chest. I said to myself, goodbye to my so-called family. We exchanged rings and officially became husband and wife. But my greedy and arrogant family didn't just stop at boycotting the wedding. Their real blow was yet to come. After the wedding was over, as we walked out of the church, I saw a massive black Mercedes parked outside. A senior man stepped out of the car. I knew him very well. He was Mr. Sterling, the chief legal counsel for my father's company. He didn't congratulate us on our wedding. There was no smile on his face. He walked straight up to me, pulled a thick envelope out of his briefcase, and handed it to me. In a robotic, cold voice, he said, "Mrs. Carter. Oh, excuse me, Mrs. Hayes. Your father sent me. We need your signature on these documents. Right now." I asked in shock. "What kind of documents are these?" Mr. Sterling replied with a chillingly cold tone. "It is a legal notice. Since you decided to marry a homeless man against your family's wishes, your family has decided that from today, you will have absolutely no rights to any Carter family assets. You will never be able to claim a single penny from their bank balances, trust funds, family businesses, or any future inheritance. Simply put, legally, you are no longer a part of the Carter family. After hearing those words, Daniel looked at me as if he had committed a massive crime. He probably thought that because of him, I was about to lose everything I ever had. But you know what? I didn't feel like crying anymore. My hands weren't shaking at all. Instead, a fierce stubbornness ignited inside me. I snatched the pen out of the lawyer's hand. I didn't even bother opening the documents to read them. I flipped straight to the last page and signed my name. Then, I threw the file back into the lawyer's chest. I looked him dead in the eyes and said in a very clear, loud voice, "Mr. Sterling, you go tell my father. I don't want a single penny of his money. I have already found exactly what I wanted in my life. And yes, from today, I am no longer Emma Carter. I am Emma Hayes. I don't need my family's name anymore." I grabbed Daniel's hand and we started walking in the opposite direction. At that time, I had no idea just how difficult the life ahead of us was going to be. I didn't know that a terrifying truth about Daniel's past was still completely hidden from me. And I certainly didn't know that, exactly 12 years later, this arrogant family of mine would be standing at my front door, begging like the very people they despised. The day I walked away from the church, leaving my family and their billions of dollars behind, I thought the hardest part was over. I thought the worst pain was realizing my parents didn't love me. But I had no idea what it actually meant to survive in the real world with absolutely nothing. Daniel and I moved into a tiny, run-down studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. When I say tiny, I mean you could stand in the middle of the room and touch the kitchen counter and the bed at the same time. The wallpaper was peeling off, the heater barely worked, and the faucet in the sink had a constant, annoying drip. We didn't even have a real bed, just a cheap, thin mattress we found at a thrift store, placed directly on the cold wooden floor. For a girl who grew up in a Beverly Hills mansion with personal chefs and silk bedsheets, this should have been a nightmare. But surprisingly, it wasn't. Because every night, before we went to sleep on that hard floor, Daniel would pull me close, kiss my forehead, and say, "I promise, Emma, one day I will give you the world." And I believed him. But the outside world was not as kind. Daniel looked exactly like what my family called him, a poor man trying to survive. He wore faded jeans, shirts he bought from the discount bin, and a cheap watch with a cracked glass face. He drove a rusty old sedan that made a terrible noise every time he started the engine. To make sure we had food on the table, he worked 3 different jobs. He delivered newspapers at dawn, washed dishes at a diner in the afternoon, and worked as a security guard at night. While Daniel was breaking his back to earn pennies, my family was busy turning our lives into a public joke. They couldn't just leave us alone. They wanted to make sure everyone in our social circle knew how far I had fallen. One evening, while sitting in our freezing apartment, I opened my social media. The first thing on my feed was a picture of my younger sister, posing on a yacht in Miami. But it was her caption that felt like a slap across my face. She wrote, "Some people are just born to be failures. Imagine trading a multi-million-dollar mansion for a man who used to sleep on the streets. So embarrassing." Beneath the post, all our family friends were laughing in the comments. I scrolled down and saw a video clip from a charity gala. A reporter asked my mother how she felt about my marriage. My mother smiled her perfect, fake, camera-ready smile, took a sip of her champagne, and said, "Oh, don't worry about Emma. Poverty is a great teacher. Once she realizes that true love can't pay the electricity bill, she'll come crawling back to us within a year. She just needs to learn her lesson." I quickly turned off my phone, my hands shaking with anger and humiliation. I didn't cry, but my heart burned. I never showed those posts to Daniel. I didn't want him to carry the weight of my family's toxic words. But there was something about Daniel that I couldn't quite figure out. Despite doing odd jobs all day, Daniel never acted like a defeated man. He never complained about being tired. And strangely, he never, ever talked about his past. Whenever I asked him where he grew up or what happened to his parents, his eyes would instantly turn dark. He would gently change the subject, completely shutting down. I knew he was hiding a deep pain, but I didn't push him. However, I started noticing a pattern. No matter how exhausted he was from working 3 jobs, Daniel never went straight to sleep. He had bought an old, second-hand laptop from a pawn shop. It was thick, heavy, and missing a couple of keys. Every single night, after I went to sleep, he would sit at the small wooden kitchen table, staring at that bright blue screen. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up feeling cold. The apartment was pitch dark, except for the glow of the laptop screen in the corner. I quietly got up and walked over to him. I expected him to be applying for better jobs or maybe reading the news. But as I looked over his shoulder, my mind went completely blank. The screen was filled with complex algorithms, 3D architectural models, and lines of advanced coding that I couldn't even begin to understand. His fingers were flying across the keyboard with the speed and precision of a master engineer. This wasn't the work of a dishwasher. This wasn't the work of a security guard. I stood there for a moment, completely stunned. Finally, I placed my hand on his shoulder. He jumped slightly, startled by my touch, and quickly tried to close the tabs. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you doing up so late? What are you building?" He stopped. He didn't look at me for a long time. The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, he slowly turned his chair around. His eyes were red from exhaustion, but there was a fiery, intense passion in them that I had never seen before. He looked at me and said in a low, steady voice, "I am building something that will give people the second chance I never got." He didn't explain what it meant. He didn't tell me what the code was for. But the very next morning, Daniel took the last $150 we had in our savings jar, the money we had saved for our heating bill. He took that money, went to the city hall, and officially registered a small technology company. It was a company with no office, no investors, no employees, and a CEO who only owned 1 pair of shoes. My family thought I had married a homeless nobody. But what they didn't know, and what even I was just beginning to realize, was that Daniel wasn't just a poor man off the streets. Inside that tiny, broken apartment, a genius was quietly building an empire. And the dark secret behind why he was homeless in the first place was about to change our lives forever. For the first few months after Daniel registered his company, nothing changed on the outside. We were still living in that freezing, tiny apartment. We were still eating instant noodles for dinner, and Daniel was still washing dishes at the diner to pay our rent. But on the inside, something had completely shifted. Every night, after finishing his 3 jobs, Daniel would sit at that broken kitchen table with his second-hand laptop. He didn't sleep. I would wake up at 4 in the morning and see the blue light reflecting off his tired but fiercely determined face. I knew he was building something massive, but I still didn't know the truth about who he really was. That truth finally came out on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Daniel was out doing his delivery job, and I was cleaning our small apartment. While sweeping the floor, I reached under our cheap mattress and my hand brushed against something hard. It was a small, dusty, metal lockbox. I had never seen it before. The lock was broken, so I slowly opened the lid. Inside, there was no money. Instead, there was a stack of old, yellowed blueprints, a thick leather journal, and a faded photograph. I picked up the photograph. It showed a younger Daniel, maybe around 20 years old. But he wasn't wearing torn clothes. He was wearing a sharp, tailored graduation suit, smiling brightly next to an older man who looked just like him. The older man was holding a plaque that read, "Arthur Hayes, Innovation in Artificial Intelligence." I carefully opened the leather journal. The pages were filled with the same complex algorithms and 3D architectural models I had seen on Daniel's laptop screen. On the first page, written in elegant handwriting, were the words, "To my son, Daniel. Never let them tell you that the future cannot be rewritten." My heart started beating faster. What was this? Who was Arthur Hayes? And if Daniel came from a family of educated innovators, How did he end up sleeping on the cold pavement of city streets? Suddenly, I heard the front door click. Daniel walked in, soaking wet from the rain. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me sitting on the floor, holding the photograph and the journal. For a moment, neither of us said a word. I saw a flash of pure panic in his eyes, followed by a deep, overwhelming sadness. He slowly closed the door, walked over to me, and sat on the floor by my side. He took the photograph from my hands, staring at the older man in the picture. "That's my father," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. "Arthur Hayes." I looked at him gently. "Daniel, what happened to him? What happened to you?" He took a deep breath, and for the first time in our entire relationship, he completely broke down his walls. He told me the story he had kept buried deep inside his chest. "I wasn't always homeless, Emma," he began, looking down at his rough, scarred hands. "I grew up in a good home. My father was one of the most brilliant software engineers of his generation. He spent his entire life developing a revolutionary technology, a medical AI system that could predict early-stage diseases years before they became fatal. It was supposed to change the world. It was supposed to save millions of lives." He paused, and a dark shadow crossed his face. "But my father was a scientist, not a businessman. He trusted the wrong people. When the technology was finally ready, he needed funding to launch it. He partnered with a massive corporate investment firm. But those investors didn't want to save lives. They just wanted a monopoly. When my father refused to let them price the technology out of reach for normal people, they destroyed him." Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes, but his jaw was clenched with anger. "They used legal loopholes, fabricated fraud charges, and froze all his bank accounts. They dragged him into court for years until he was completely bankrupt. They took our house. They took the company. The stress. It was too much for him. He had a massive heart attack and died right in front of me." I covered my mouth, tears streaming down my own face. I moved closer and wrapped my arms around him, letting him lean into my shoulder. "After the funeral," Daniel continued, his voice trembling, "the corporate lawyers came for whatever was left. I was young, drowning in my father's legal debts. I lost the apartment. I lost my bank accounts. I lost everything. That's how I ended up on the streets. For 2 years, I slept on park benches. I ate from garbage cans. I was a ghost." He slowly pulled back and looked me right in the eyes. The sadness in his face was gone, replaced by a burning, unbreakable fire. "But they made one fatal mistake, Emma," he said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Before they seized my father's lab, I managed to copy the core source code of his life's work onto an encrypted hard drive. They stole the shell, but I kept the soul. And for the last 10 months, every single night, I haven't just been writing code. I have been rebuilding my father's empire. I sat there, completely speechless. The man my family had mercilessly mocked, the man they called a homeless nobody, wasn't a victim. He was a survivor. He was a brilliant inventor carrying the legacy of a genius. He had endured the worst kind of hell, but he never let it destroy him. I held his face in my hands and said, 'You are going to finish it, Daniel. And you are going to show the world exactly who you are.' From that day on, everything accelerated. 3 months later, Daniel finally completed the prototype. He sent a single, encrypted presentation to a select few contacts in the tech industry. For 3 agonizing weeks, we heard absolutely nothing. I thought maybe we had failed. Maybe the world wasn't ready. But then, one Tuesday morning, as Daniel was tying his shoes to go to his dishwashing job, his phone rang. It wasn't a bill collector. It wasn't the diner manager. It was an executive assistant from one of the most powerful venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. Daniel put the phone on speaker. I held my breath as a crisp, professional voice filled our tiny, broken apartment. "Mr. Hayes? My name is Richard Vance. I represent the leading board of Titan Ventures. Our senior partners reviewed your presentation last night. They canceled all their morning meetings. They want to fly you out to California tomorrow. We want to fund your company." Daniel looked at me. A single tear rolled down his cheek, but a fierce smile broke across his face. The days of sleeping on the floor were over. The rise of the homeless man was about to begin. But what we didn't know was that our newfound success was about to attract the attention of the exact people who threw me away. My family. 4 years. That's how long it took for our lives to completely turn upside down. When that venture capital firm in Silicon Valley handed Daniel his first seed funding, we finally packed our bags and walked out of that freezing, tiny apartment forever. I remember the day we left. Daniel stood at the doorway, looked at the cold wooden floor where we used to sleep, and whispered, "We are never coming back here." And he kept his promise. Over the next 4 years, Daniel's company grew at a terrifying speed. His medical AI technology was flawless. It started saving lives in hospitals across the country. We weren't billionaires yet, but we were very comfortable. We bought a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood. Daniel finally bought a tailored suit that actually fit him. But despite the money, our hearts remained exactly the same. We still loved each other with the same raw intensity we had when we were surviving on instant noodles. For 4 entire years, my family acted like I was a ghost. No phone calls on my birthday. No Merry Christmas texts. Nothing. But as they say, money has a very funny way of bringing the dead back to life. Before I tell you exactly what happened the day they returned, I just want to take a quick second to talk to you directly. Yes, you, the person listening to my voice right now. If you have stayed with me this far into the story, it means you truly understand the pain and the journey I've been through. It takes a lot of courage to share these dark family secrets with the world. So, if my story is touching your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. It would mean the absolute world to me. And please, drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family? I read every single comment, and your support gives this small channel the strength to keep growing. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, let's get back to the story. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my living room, drinking coffee, when my phone suddenly rang. I looked at the screen, and my heart completely stopped. It was an unknown number, but the area code was from my hometown. I hesitated, then answered. "Emma? Is that you, darling?" It was my mother. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. 4 years of absolute, brutal silence, and here she was, sounding exactly like she did when she used to call me down for breakfast. No guilt, no hesitation. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice freezing cold. "Oh, Emma, please don't be like that," she said, forcing a fake sigh. "Your father and I were just talking about you. We just want to see how you're doing. Can we meet? Just you and me. I'm at a cafe downtown. I should have hung up. I really should have." But a part of me, the foolish, broken inner child who still craved her mother's love, wanted to look her in the eyes. I wanted to see if she felt even a single drop of remorse. I didn't dress up. I wore a simple pair of jeans and a plain sweater. I didn't want her to know we had money now. I wanted to see her true intentions. When I walked into the upscale cafe, she was already sitting there, wearing a designer dress and a diamond necklace. But as I got closer, I noticed something was wrong. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. Her hands were slightly shaking as she held her teacup. I sat across from her. She didn't hug me. She just looked at my simple clothes and smiled a pitying smile. "Look at you, Emma," she said, shaking her head. "Still wearing cheap clothes. I told you this would happen. I told you that beggar would drag you down into the mud." I clenched my fists under the table. "You called me here after 4 years just to insult my husband? I called you here to save you." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Your father is willing to forgive you. He's willing to let you come back home. But you have to divorce Daniel. Leave him. He is a nobody, Emma. Come back to your real family." I stared at her in utter disbelief. She had absolutely no idea that the nobody she was talking about was currently sitting in a glass boardroom in Silicon Valley, closing a $50 million deal. But then, she said something incredibly strange. "Besides," she said, stirring her tea nervously, We heard a rumor that Daniel is trying to start some kind of tech business. Medical software, right? Your father wants to know, how is that going? Does he have any real investors? Have you seen his source code? I froze. Why was my mother asking highly specific questions about Daniel's source code? My family despised the tech industry. They were in real estate and traditional finance. Why did my father care about Daniel's company? I stood up, pushing my chair back. You didn't want me when I had nothing, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and realization. Don't come looking for me now. And don't you ever ask about my husband's business again. I walked out of the cafe without looking back. My heart was pounding. Something was horribly wrong. My family didn't reach out because they missed me. They were fishing for information. When I got home that evening, Daniel was sitting in his home office. He had brought back a huge box of old, dusty legal documents from his father's bankruptcy case. He was working with his new lawyers to finally clear his late father's name. Hey, Daniel smiled, looking exhausted but happy. My lawyers managed to get the unredacted files from the investment firm that destroyed my dad. The shell company that bought my dad's assets for pennies. The true owner's name is finally unsealed. Daniel, I said, my voice trembling, remembering my mother's weird questions. Let me see it. He handed me a yellowed piece of paper. It was the original takeover contract from over a decade ago. I looked at the bottom of the page. There, under the title Primary Shareholder of the Acquiring Firm, was a signature. I dropped the paper. All the air left my lungs. The room started spinning. I knew that signature. I had seen it on my birthday cards. I had seen it on the legal notice that disowned me on my wedding day. The ruthless, faceless corporate monster who had stolen Arthur Hayes' life's work. The man who had driven Daniel's father to his death and forced my husband to sleep on the streets. It was my father. My own father had destroyed my husband's family. And suddenly, the terrifying truth hit me like a freight train. 12 years ago, my father didn't hate Daniel because he was poor. He hated Daniel because he knew exactly who Daniel was. He knew Daniel was Arthur Hayes' son. And he knew that if Daniel ever found out the truth, it would destroy our family's empire. I stood there in the middle of Daniel's office, staring at that piece of paper on the floor. My father's signature felt like a knife twisting straight into my chest. The room was completely silent, but inside my head, 1,000 alarms were ringing. Daniel noticed my pale face. He quickly got up from his chair, walked over, and picked up the paper. He looked at the signature, then looked at me. His eyes widened. The realization hit him just as hard as it had hit me. Emma, Daniel whispered, his voice trembling in disbelief. Is this? Yes, I choked out, tears instantly filling my eyes. That's my father's signature. In that one single second, the entire narrative of my life shattered into pieces. Every memory, every insult, every action my family had ever taken suddenly made horrifying sense. I fell to my knees, crying uncontrollably. Daniel immediately dropped to the floor and held me tight. He didn't yell. He didn't push me away. Even after finding out that the blood running through my veins belonged to the man who murdered his father, Daniel just held me and kissed the top of my head. I'm so sorry, Daniel. I sobbed into his chest. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. I know you didn't, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. You are nothing like them, Emma. You are my wife. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat on the living room floor, surrounded by piles of old documents, piecing together the darkest betrayal I could have ever imagined. 12 years ago, my father wasn't just a random wealthy businessman. He was secretly running a shell corporation, a shadow company that preyed on vulnerable tech startups. My father wasn't an inventor, he was a thief. When Arthur Hayes, Daniel's father, presented his revolutionary medical AI technology, my father realized it was worth billions, but he didn't want to buy it fairly. He wanted to steal it. He manipulated the legal system, froze Arthur's accounts, and drove the poor man into a fatal heart attack. But my father's master plan had a fatal flaw. When he finally took over the lab, the most important thing was missing: the core source code. My father's engineers spent years trying to recreate the AI, but they couldn't do it. The technology was useless without Arthur's final algorithms. My father knew that the only person who could possibly have the code was Arthur's son, Daniel. For years, my father secretly hired private investigators to track Daniel down. But Daniel had completely disappeared into the streets, living as a ghost. And then, the ultimate irony happened. I, the daughter of the man who ruined his life, met Daniel at a local charity kitchen where I used to volunteer. We fell in love. I brought him home to meet my parents. I still remember the day I introduced Daniel to my father. I thought my father was just being a snob when he looked at Daniel with absolute disgust. But now, looking at these documents, I realized the truth. My father didn't look at Daniel with disgust. He looked at him with sheer terror. My father recognized him. He knew exactly who Daniel was. He realized that his daughter was about to marry the son of the man he had practically murdered. If Daniel ever became part of the family, if he ever got close enough to see my father's business records, the truth would come out. My father would lose his empire, and he would go to federal prison. That was the real reason they refused to attend my wedding. That was the real reason they sent that legal notice on my wedding night, officially disowning me and stripping me of my inheritance. It wasn't because they cared about social status. It wasn't because Daniel was poor. It was a desperate attempt to build a legal wall between me and the family business, so Daniel could never, ever touch my father's assets. My father isolated me, cut me off, and tried to starve me out, hoping I would leave Daniel and come back home alone. But I didn't. I stayed with him. My mother, I whispered, looking up at Daniel, my blood running cold. That's why she called me today. That's why she was asking about your source code. Daniel's eyes darkened. Your father's company is failing, Emma. I've been tracking their stocks. Without my dad's technology, his firm has been bleeding money for years. He's drowning in debt. And now, the media is starting to talk about a mysterious new medical AI startup that's making waves in Silicon Valley. He knows it's me. He knows I survived. I felt a sickening feeling in my stomach. So they want to destroy you again. Daniel slowly stood up and walked over to the window, looking out into the dark night. His posture completely changed. The gentle, quiet man I had married 12 years ago suddenly looked incredibly dangerous. "No, Emma," Daniel said, his voice dropping into a cold, terrifyingly calm tone. He destroyed an innocent scientist. He destroyed a helpless kid. But I am not that kid anymore. And I have exactly what he desperately needs to stay out of prison. Daniel turned to look at me, and I saw a fire in his eyes that sent shivers down my spine. "They thought they threw you away," Daniel said quietly. "But all they did was hand me the key to their destruction. We are not hiding anymore, Emma. It's time to show your family exactly who they messed with." That was the night the scared, homeless boy officially died. And the $150 million Titan was born. The trap was set, and my family was about to walk right into it. The morning after we discovered my father's dark secret, something fundamentally changed inside our home. The sadness was gone. The confusion was gone. The only thing left was a cold, razor-sharp focus. Daniel didn't just want to succeed anymore. He wanted to dominate. And he wanted to do it so loudly that my father would have no choice but to hear it. For the next 8 years, Daniel worked like a man possessed. He didn't just build a company, he built a fortress. His medical AI technology, the exact technology my father had tried to steal, was officially launched. It was a masterpiece. It could analyze patient data and predict heart failures, strokes, and aggressive cancers with 99% accuracy, months before any human doctor could catch them. It didn't just change the healthcare industry, it completely revolutionized it. Hospitals across Europe and America started begging for contracts. The biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world wanted to partner with him. But Daniel was smart. Remembering what happened to his father, he refused to sell even a single share of his core technology. He maintained absolute, terrifying control over everything. And then, the valuation came in. I still remember the day Daniel walked into our kitchen. I was making breakfast. He just stood by the counter, holding a sleek black folder from his lead financial advisor. He looked at me, a calm but deeply satisfied smile on his face, and tossed the folder onto the kitchen island. "Open it," he said softly. I wiped my hands, opened the folder, and looked at the official audit from Wall Street. The total valuation of his company had crossed $500 million. But that wasn't the number that made me drop my coffee mug. The second page showed Daniel's personal liquid assets, stocks, and net worth. $150 million. $150 million. I looked up at him, completely speechless. The man who used to count pennies to buy a loaf of bread, the man who wore a broken watch and slept on a thin mattress on the floor, was now worth $150 million. "We did it, Emma," he whispered, pulling me into a tight hug. "No one can ever hurt us again." With that kind of wealth, our lives transformed in ways I had only ever seen in movies. We moved out of our nice suburban house and bought a massive, ultra-modern gated mansion in Beverly Hills. It had a private driveway, a cinematic home theater, and a security team that monitored the property 24/7. Daniel bought me a custom-made Porsche, but honestly, I still preferred driving my old SUV. Despite the millions sitting in our bank accounts, Daniel and I still loved sitting on the floor eating pizza on Friday nights. Money didn't change who we were inside. It just gave us power. But out in the public world, Daniel could no longer hide. The media finally caught wind of the genius behind the greatest medical tech of the decade. The business magazines and news channels went crazy. They loved his story. It was the ultimate American dream. One evening, I was sitting in our living room, watching the national news on our massive TV screen. The anchor appeared, and behind him flashed a huge picture of Daniel, looking incredibly sharp in a custom Italian suit. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "From sleeping on the streets to a $150 million fortune." The rise of tech titan Daniel Hayes. The anchor's voice filled the room. Tonight, we bring you the incredible story of Daniel Hayes. Just 12 years ago, this brilliant innovator was completely homeless, sleeping on park benches and washing dishes to survive. Today, his medical AI company is valued at over $500 million, making him one of the youngest self-made centimillionaires in the country. As I watched the screen, a slow, dark smile crept across my face. Because I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that a few miles away, in a crumbling, debt-ridden mansion, my parents were watching this exact same news broadcast. And I was right. Later, through a mutual family friend who had remained loyal to me, I found out exactly what happened in my father's house that night. My mother was sipping her expensive wine, watching the television. When Daniel's face appeared on the screen, the wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. She stared at the screen, her face turning pale white. The man she had called a homeless beggar, the man she said would drag me into the mud, the man she mocked for 12 years, was now wealthier, more powerful, and more respected than my father could ever dream to be. But the real shock was for my father. When he heard the name Daniel Hayes and saw the technology being described on the news, he realized his worst nightmare had come to life. The boy whose inheritance he had stolen hadn't just survived. He had conquered the industry. My father's shadow company was already on the verge of bankruptcy. He was drowning in tens of millions of dollars of hidden debt. He had taken illegal loans to try and replicate Daniel's technology, and he had failed miserably. The federal investigators were already sniffing around his fake accounting books. He was a cornered rat, seconds away from losing his mansion, his reputation, and his freedom. He knew there was only one person on the entire planet who had the money and the power to save him from total destruction: his daughter. The daughter he had publicly disowned and thrown onto the streets 12 years ago. The next morning, I was sitting on my patio, enjoying a cup of coffee and looking out at the beautiful Los Angeles skyline. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the security guard stationed at the main gate of our estate. The text read, "Mrs. Hayes, there is a woman at the front gate. She is driving a silver Mercedes. She says she is your mother and she insists on seeing you. Should I call the police or let her in?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. The air suddenly felt incredibly sweet. For 12 long years, they had made me feel worthless. For 12 years, they thought they held all the power. They thought I would be the one crawling back to them, begging for scraps. But the tables hadn't just turned. The table had been completely destroyed. I replied to the security guard with just 3 words: "Let her in." I set my coffee mug down on the patio table. My heart was beating a little faster, but not out of fear. It was the adrenaline of knowing that a 12-year wait was finally coming to an end. I stood up, smoothed out my silk loungewear, and walked slowly toward the grand double doors of our mansion. Through the massive glass windows, I watched the silver Mercedes pull up our long, winding driveway. The car parked, and the driver's door opened. It was my mother. 12 years had passed since that day in the cafe, and time had not been kind to her. She was wearing a very expensive Chanel suit, trying her hardest to look wealthy and in control. But I could see right through the facade. Her posture was stiff. Her hands were gripping a $3,000 Prada leather folder a little too tightly, and the fake confidence on her face was cracking. She walked up the stone steps and reached for the doorbell. But before she could press it, I opened the door. We stood face to face. The silence between us was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She looked at me, then looked past me, her eyes scanning the towering ceilings, the imported Italian marble floors, and the custom chandeliers of our house. I saw a brief flash of pure shock and deep, burning jealousy cross her eyes before she forced a bright, trembling smile onto her face. "Emma, darling," she said, her voice dripping with fake emotion. She stepped forward with her arms open, trying to pull me into a hug. I took a very deliberate step back. I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. I just stared coldly into her eyes. Her arms dropped awkwardly to her sides. She cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. You have a beautiful home, Emma. I always knew you had exquisite taste. Why are you here?" I asked. My voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. She let out a dramatic, rehearsed sigh, bringing a hand to her chest. "Oh, Emma, please. I know we've had our differences. I know things were difficult in the past. But I'm your mother. I've missed you so much. Every single day, I regretted not being there for you. I made mistakes, I admit it. But can't we just let the past be the past?" She even managed to squeeze out a single, fake tear. If I was still the naive, broken girl from 12 years ago, I might have believed her. I might have hugged her back. But I knew the truth. I knew she wasn't here for a daughter. She was here for a rescue boat. I didn't invite her in, but she boldly stepped past me anyway, walking into my living room like she still owned me. She sat down on my custom-made sofa, placing her expensive leather folder neatly on the glass coffee table in front of her. "I didn't come here just to apologize, Emma," she said, suddenly dropping the emotional act. Her tone shifted to business. "I came here because the family needs you. Your father needs you." I crossed my arms and stood a few feet away from her. The family I have no legal relation to? Or the father who legally disowned me on my wedding day? She waved her hand dismissively, as if destroying my life 12 years ago was just a tiny misunderstanding. "People say things when they are angry, Emma. You know how your father is. He is a proud man. But right now, he is very sick. The family business has hit a small rough patch. Nothing we can't handle, of course, but it's causing him so much stress. A small rough patch. That's what she called tens of millions of dollars in illegal debt and a pending federal investigation." "So," I said slowly, tilting my head, "you came here to ask the homeless beggar for money?" Her face twitched. For a split second, the mask slipped, and I saw the absolute humiliation burning in her eyes. But she swallowed her pride. She had to. She unzipped her leather folder, pulled out a thick stack of printed papers, and placed them on the table. "We are not asking for a handout, Emma," she said, trying to sound authoritative. "We are offering you an opportunity to reinvest in your own legacy. After all, you have more money now than you know what to do with. I have discussed this with your father, and we have drafted a list. 7 things. 7 simple requests to fix everything and bring our family back together. I stared at the papers. I couldn't believe her audacity. She hadn't spoken to me in over a decade. She had tried to ruin my husband, and now she was sitting in my house, giving me a list of demands. Go ahead, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Read them to me. She sat up straight, cleared her throat, and began reading from the list like she was ordering food from a menu. Number 1, she started. An immediate cash injection of $10 million into the Carter Family Trust to stabilize our real estate assets. Number 2, the complete payoff of your father's personal debts, which currently amount to roughly $6 million. Number 3, a $5 million venture fund for your brother's new startup. He has a brilliant idea. He just needs capital. Number 4, you will purchase the mortgage of our family mansion so the bank doesn't foreclose on it, and you will transfer the deed back into your father's name. Number 5, your sister is going through a terrible divorce. You will cover her $2 million settlement and her legal fees. Number 6, a monthly allowance of $50,000 deposited into my personal account for maintenance and living expenses. And finally, number 7, she paused, looking up at me with a confident, arrogant smile, as if she was about to do me a massive favor. Your father is willing to step in as the co-chairman of Daniel's company. Daniel is just a tech guy, Emma. He doesn't know how to handle real corporate money. Your father will guide him, take over the financial board, and in return, Daniel will give your father 40% equity in the company. I stood there in absolute silence. 40% of Daniel's company. $10 million in cash, paying off their debts, buying their house, funding my brother, paying for my sister. She wanted everything. She wanted to take the empire Daniel had built with his own blood, sweat, and tears, and just hand it over to the man who murdered his father. My mother closed the folder, leaned back into my sofa, and crossed her legs. "So," she said, smiling like she had already won, "I'll have my lawyers send the contracts to your team this afternoon. We can have all the transfers done by Friday." I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just slowly walked over to the coffee table. I picked up her ridiculous list of demands. I looked at it for a few seconds. Then, I looked her dead in the eyes, and I smiled. "Wait, right here, Mother," I said softly. "I have something I need to give you." I turned around and walked upstairs to Daniel's office, leaving her sitting alone in the living room, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet was about to crack wide open. I walked up the grand staircase of my home, every step feeling lighter than the last. For 12 years, my family's rejection had hung over my head like a dark cloud. I used to wonder what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I good enough to be loved? But now, as I walked into Daniel's office, that cloud completely vanished. Daniel was sitting at his large mahogany desk, reviewing some legal files. He looked up as I entered. He knew my mother was downstairs. We had been preparing for this day for years. "She read the list?" Daniel asked quietly, closing his laptop. "All 7 demands," I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. "She wants $10 million in cash, the mansion, your equity, and a monthly allowance. She actually thinks we're going to just hand it all over to save them." Daniel let out a low, humorless chuckle. He stood up, walked over to his private wall safe, and unlocked it. He pulled out a sleek, black envelope. It wasn't very thick, but the documents inside held enough explosive power to wipe the Carter family name off the face of the earth. He walked over to me and placed the black envelope gently into my hands. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, looking deeply into my eyes. "I have been ready for 12 years, I whispered. I took the envelope, turned around, and walked back down the stairs. When I returned to the living room, my mother was standing by the large windows, admiring my custom-built swimming pool outside. She turned around when she heard my footsteps. Her face was glowing with that same arrogant, victorious smile. She genuinely believed that because I was her daughter, she could still control me. She thought my wealth was simply an extension of her own. "So," she said, clasping her hands together. "Did you speak to Daniel? When can we expect the first wire transfer?" I didn't say a word. I just walked over to the glass coffee table, placed the black envelope right next to her $3,000 leather folder, and tapped it twice with my finger. "Open it," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. My mother frowned slightly, clearly confused by my tone. "Emma, darling, we don't need to do any counteroffers. The list I gave you is perfectly reasonable for—" "Open the envelope," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a sharp, commanding tone. She stopped talking. Her eyes darted from my face to the black envelope on the table. Slowly, with hesitant fingers, she picked it up, unsealed it, and pulled out the documents inside. The very first paper she saw was yellowed and old. She stared at it for a few seconds. I watched as the confident smile slowly melted off her face, replaced by absolute confusion. "Emma, what is this?" she asked, her voice faltering. This is the legal notice we sent you on your wedding day." "Yes, it is," I said, crossing my arms. "Read the bottom paragraph aloud, please." She swallowed hard, holding the paper with trembling hands, and read the words she herself had forced me to sign 12 years ago. "By signing this document, Emma Carter permanently forfeits all rights, claims, and privileges to the Carter family assets. She is officially disowned and absolved of all familial ties. She owes the Carter family nothing, and the Carter family owes her nothing. This severance is absolute and permanent." She looked up at me, trying to force a laugh, but it sounded like a nervous gasp. "Emma, I told you, your father was angry. It's just an old piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything now." "Actually," I said, taking a step closer to her, "it means everything. Because of that exact piece of paper, legally, I am not your daughter. I have no legal obligation to pay off a single penny of my father's debt. You made sure of that yourself." Her face turned pale. "Emma, you can't be serious. We are blood. We are family. You wouldn't let your own father go bankrupt." "Keep reading," I said coldly, pointing at the rest of the documents in her hand. "Look at the second paper." Her hands were visibly shaking now. She pulled out the second document. It wasn't a family letter. It was a highly confidential corporate banking record, stamped with the seal of federal investigators. Her eyes scanned the page, and as she realized what she was looking at, all the color completely drained from her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. "How?" she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Where did you get this? This is highly classified." "That is a certified record of a shadow company your husband used 12 years ago," I explained, my voice sharp and clear, making sure she heard every single word. "A shadow company he used to bankrupt, destroy, and steal the life's work of a brilliant scientist named Arthur Hayes." My mother stumbled backward, her legs hitting the edge of the sofa. She fell onto the cushions, gasping for air. "You see, Mother," I continued, pacing slowly in front of her, "I know everything. I know my father drove Arthur Hayes to a fatal heart attack. I know he stole the lab. And I know that 12 years ago, my father recognized Daniel. He knew exactly who my husband was. That's why you didn't come to my wedding. You were terrified that the son of the man you murdered would find out what you did." "Emma, no, please. You don't understand," she stammered, tears of absolute panic finally welling up in her eyes. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, leaning down so my face was just inches from hers. "You came into my house today, asking for $10 million and 40% equity in my husband's company. You wanted to steal his life's work, again. You thought you could manipulate the homeless boy one last time." I pointed at the third and final document in her hand. "Look at the last page, Mother." She looked down. It was a formal legal indictment, already drafted and signed by our powerhouse legal team, detailing every single count of corporate fraud, theft, and illegal loans my father had committed over the last 2 decades. "My husband didn't just build a $500 million empire," I whispered. "He spent the last 12 years tracking down every single fake bank account, every single illegal loan, and every single bribe my father ever made. We own his debt. We own his mortgage. We hold the absolute proof of his crimes. My mother dropped the papers. She put her hands over her face and began to sob loudly. But these weren't fake tears anymore. This was the raw, ugly crying of a woman who just realized her entire universe had collapsed. "Emma, please," she begged, grabbing my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "Please don't do this. If you release these documents, your father will go to federal prison for the rest of his life. We will lose everything. I will be on the streets." I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who told me I was dead to her, the woman who laughed when my husband couldn't afford a meal. I gently pulled my arm out of her grasp. "You didn't come here today to ask for help," I said, my voice echoing in the massive, quiet living room. "You came here because you finally realized what you threw away." I picked up her $3,000 Prada folder, along with her ridiculous list of 7 demands, and dropped them into her lap. "Get out of my house," I said. I stood by the window and watched my mother stumble out of my front door. She looked like she had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. She practically fell into her Mercedes, the tires screeching as her driver sped away from our estate. For the first time in 12 years, I took a deep, full breath. The heavy chains of my toxic family were finally broken. I felt light. I felt free. When Daniel came downstairs, he didn't ask how it went. He just looked at my face, pulled me into a long, warm embrace, and kissed the top of my head. We thought it was over. We thought that by showing them the absolute proof of their crimes, they would quietly back off, accept their defeat, and wait for the legal system to tear them apart. But we underestimated the sheer desperation of cornered animals. My father was not the kind of man to go down quietly. He had spent his entire life manipulating narratives and controlling the truth. When my mother went home and told him that we had the evidence of his fraud, he knew he was completely trapped. But instead of surrendering, he decided to launch one final, incredibly dirty attack against us. He decided to use the media. 3 days after my mother's visit, Daniel and I were having breakfast when my phone started blowing up with notifications. Then Daniel's phone started ringing endlessly. I opened my social media, and my stomach instantly dropped. My sister, the one whose $2 million divorce settlement I had just refused to pay, had posted a massive, crying video on her public profile. It was professionally edited, and within hours, it had gone viral across all our local news networks. In the video, she was sitting in a modest-looking room, trying to look as poor and victimized as possible. She looked directly into the camera, wiping away fake tears. "I never thought I would have to bring my family's private pain to the internet," she sniffled in the video. "But I am completely heartbroken. My older sister, Emma, married a billionaire tech mogul named Daniel Hayes. We were so happy for them. But recently, our father fell incredibly ill, and our family business hit a severe financial crisis. We reached out to Emma, just asking for a small loan to keep our family from going homeless. She paused for dramatic effect, letting out a heavy sob. But money changes people. My sister laughed in our mother's face. She kicked her out of her mansion. Emma and Daniel have hundreds of millions of dollars, yet they are purposely letting their own flesh and blood starve. Daniel Hayes might be a genius, but he is a heartless, greedy man who enjoys watching his wife's family suffer. I dropped my phone on the table. I couldn't believe it. They were playing the victim. They were trying to publicly shame us into giving them money. By the afternoon, cheap gossip blogs and local news channels had picked up the story. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire tech couple abandons sick father, and does Daniel Hayes have a heart of stone? My family was trying to destroy Daniel's public image, hoping the negative PR would force his company's board of directors to pressure him into a quiet settlement with my father. I looked at Daniel. He was calmly drinking his coffee, reading the headlines on his tablet. He didn't look angry. He didn't look stressed. "Daniel," I said, my voice trembling with rage, "they are lying to the whole world. They are trying to ruin your reputation. We have to issue a statement. We have to tell the truth." Daniel slowly set down his coffee mug. He looked at me with that same cold, terrifyingly calm focus he had on the night we discovered my father's betrayal. "No, Emma," he said softly. "Statements are for politicians. We don't issue statements." He picked up his phone and dialed his chief legal counsel. The call connected instantly. "Richard," Daniel said, his voice completely steady. "It's time. Unseal the Arthur Hayes files, all of them. Send the financial records, the shadow company transfers, and the forged signatures directly to the district attorney's office. And Richard?" Daniel paused, a dark, merciless smile crossing his face. "BCC every major investigative journalist in the country. Let's show the world exactly why we are letting the Carter family starve." Within 48 hours, the fake narrative my sister had built completely disintegrated into thin air. We didn't have to say a single word. The journalists did the work for us. When the media received the unsealed documents proving that my father was a corporate predator who had literally stolen the technology from Daniel's late father, the internet exploded. The story shifted overnight. The headlines changed from "Heartless Billionaire" to "The $150 Million Revenge," how Daniel Hayes avenged his father's murder. The public backlash against my family was apocalyptic. The people who were pitying my sister just 2 days ago were now tearing her apart in the comments. My father's few remaining business partners immediately cut all ties with him, desperate to distance themselves from the massive fraud scandal. The banks froze their accounts. My father's empire didn't just crumble, it exploded. And then came the final blow. A week later, I received an email from my father's personal assistant. It was an official invitation. My father was begging for one final, private meeting. He wanted Daniel and me to come to the Carter family mansion. He promised that the entire family would be there. He said he was ready to surrender. I showed the email to Daniel. "Are we going?" I asked him. Daniel stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "They gave you 12 years without a family, Emma. It is only fair that we go there and officially return the favor." The final showdown was about to happen. We were heading back to the very mansion I grew up in. But this time, I wasn't walking in as the scared daughter they had thrown away. I was walking in as the woman who held their entire existence in the palm of her hand. Driving up the long, winding road to the Carter family mansion felt surreal. This was the house where I took my first steps. This was the house where we had grand Thanksgiving dinners, where my parents hosted lavish parties for billionaires and politicians. But as Daniel's black SUV pulled through the massive iron gates, the estate looked completely different. The perfectly manicured lawns were overgrown. The grand fountain in the front was turned off, the water stagnant. And parked outside the front door were 2 black sedans belonging to federal auditors. The empire was officially dead. We were just here to read its last rites. Daniel held my hand as we walked up the stone steps. The heavy oak doors were already open. When we walked into the grand dining room, my entire family was sitting around the long mahogany table. My mother, looking pale and exhausted. My brother, staring at the floor, his usual arrogance completely gone. My sister, the one who tried to destroy us on the internet, wouldn't even make eye contact with me. And at the head of the table sat my father. The powerful, terrifying man who had controlled my entire life looked incredibly small. His suit hung loosely on his shoulders. The deep wrinkles on his face made him look like a broken, defeated old man. Nobody stood up to greet us. The silence in the room was suffocating. Daniel pulled out a chair for me, and I sat down directly across from my father. Daniel stood right behind my chair, his hands resting gently on my shoulders, a silent guardian. For a long moment, my father just stared at me. Finally, he cleared his dry throat. "Emma," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "You won." I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just looked at him. "The federal investigators were here this morning," he continued, his hands trembling slightly as he placed them on the table. "They seized the servers. They froze the trust funds. The bank is foreclosing on this house next week. I am facing 20 years in federal prison." He paused, taking a shaky breath before looking up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. I am a ruined man, Emma. I have lost everything. But your mother, your brother, your sister, they didn't do anything. I am begging you. Drop the civil lawsuits against the family trust. Give them a fraction of the money. Just enough so they don't end up on the streets. Please, Emma. You are my daughter. I let his words hang in the air for a few seconds. Then, I slowly reached into my designer handbag. I pulled out the $3,000 Prada leather folder my mother had brought to my house a few weeks ago. I placed it on the dining table and slowly pushed it across the polished wood until it stopped right in front of my father. "Open it," I said. My father looked confused, but he slowly opened the folder. Inside, there were 7 separate, legally binding documents prepared by our lawyers. "A few weeks ago," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room, "my mother came to my house. She didn't come to apologize. She came with a list of 7 demands. She demanded $10 million. She demanded we pay off your debt. She demanded 40% of my husband's company. She demanded everything." My mother squeezed her eyes shut, crying silently into her hands. "So," I continued, pointing at the folder, "I had my legal team draft the official responses to those 7 demands. Read them, Father." My father looked down at the first document. It was a formal legal rejection of the $10 million request. Written in bold red ink across the bottom of the page was one single word: no. He flipped to the second document. The request to pay off his debts. No. He flipped to the third. No. One by one, my father flipped through all 7 documents. And on every single one, the answer was exactly the same. We were not saving them a single cent. We were not saving the house. We were not helping my brother or sister. When he reached the 7th page, my father's hands fell to his lap. He looked completely shattered. "You gave me 12 years without a family," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I am giving you the exact same thing." My sister suddenly slammed her hands on the table, standing up with furious tears in her eyes. "You are a monster, Emma. You are sitting there with $150 million, and you are going to let your own mother sleep on the streets? You are sick!" Before I could even respond, Daniel spoke. His voice was low, deep, and carried a terrifying authority that instantly silenced the entire room. "Your father," Daniel said, staring directly into my sister's eyes, "used his wealth to financially suffocate my father. He stole his life's work. He drove an innocent man into an early grave, and he forced a 19-year-old kid to sleep on park benches and eat out of garbage cans. And all of you, every single one of you, lived in luxury funded by that stolen money." Daniel walked slowly around the table, stopping right behind my father's chair. "Money didn't make Emma a monster," Daniel whispered, his voice sending chills down my spine. "It simply gave her the power to stop being controlled by monsters." My father closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and rolling down his wrinkled cheek. I stood up. I looked around the room, at the faces of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, but only loved me when I had a price tag attached. 12 years ago, outside a church, you told me I was dead to you, I said softly, picking up my handbag. "Consider this my funeral." I turned around and walked out of the grand dining room, Daniel right by my side. As we walked down the hallway, the heavy silence of the house was suddenly broken by the loud, agonizing sobs of my mother. But this time, I didn't stop. I didn't turn back. I didn't feel a single drop of guilt. We walked out the front doors, got into our car, and drove away from the Carter family mansion for the very last time. 2 years have passed since that final meeting in the grand dining room of the Carter mansion. The fall of my family was swift, brutal, and highly publicized. My father's trial lasted only 3 weeks. With the overwhelming mountain of evidence Daniel's legal team provided, there was no escape. The man who once thought he could buy the world was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The family mansion was seized by the bank and sold at a public auction. My brother, who thought he was a brilliant entrepreneur, went bankrupt within 6 months without our father's stolen money to fund his lifestyle. My sister, forced to actually work for the first time in her life, moved into a tiny, cramped apartment in another state, completely cutting off contact with everyone. And my mother? She now lives alone in a small, rented house on the outskirts of the city, surviving entirely on a very modest state pension. The diamonds, the Prada bags, the country club memberships, all of it is gone forever. Daniel and I, however, built something completely different with our wealth. We didn't buy a yacht. We didn't buy private jets. Instead, we took a massive portion of our fortune and created the Arthur Hayes Foundation. It is an organization dedicated entirely to helping homeless individuals and struggling innovators get back on their feet. We provide housing, medical care, and seed funding for brilliant minds who just need a second chance. The exact second chance Daniel never got when he was sleeping on the streets. Every time I walk into the foundation and see a young, struggling kid smiling because they finally have a safe place to sleep, I know we did the right thing. Last week, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in my home office, going through the Daily Mail, when I saw a plain white envelope. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from my mother. I sat there for a long time, just staring at it. Finally, I opened it. Inside, there was a single piece of lined paper. It read, "Emma, I am so sorry. I should have come to your wedding. I have nothing left. Please, I just want to hear my daughter's voice one more time." I looked at the letter. 12 years ago, those words would have meant the world to me. I would have run to her. But now, looking at that paper, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just peace. Daniel walked into the room, holding 2 cups of coffee. He saw the letter in my hand and recognized my mother's handwriting. He gently set the coffee cups on the desk, stood beside me, and placed his hand on my shoulder. "Are you going to answer her?" he asked softly. I looked out the window at the bright morning sun shining over our beautiful home. I folded the letter, walked over to the paper shredder in the corner of the room, and dropped it in. I turned to my husband, smiled, and said, "No. Some doors should stay closed forever. My family thought they had lost a daughter the day I married a homeless man, but they were wrong. They lost a daughter the day they decided her worth depended on money. And 12 years later, they finally discovered what she was really worth." And that brings us to the end of today's story. This wasn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about true love, resilience, and rising from the ashes. There might come a time in your life when the people closest to you neglect you the most, when they just throw you away. But always remember, your destiny is not written in anyone else's hands. With patience and honesty, you will always win in the end. Thank you so much for staying with me and listening to the story of my life and this harsh truth for so long. I know that those of you who stayed with me until the very end truly listened to this story with your hearts. I have just one small request for you. If this story touched your heart, if you feel like I was able to honestly share my truth with you today, please leave a like on this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you are watching this on YouTube, please show some love and subscribe to this small channel of ours. And if you are watching from Facebook, please hit that follow button and stay by my side. Your little support gives me the courage to bring more true and powerful stories to you. Take great care of yourselves and take care of your families. I will see you very soon with a brand new story. Goodbye.